I'm speaking with Mary-Robinette Kowal, author of The Relentless Moon, a lady astronaut novel, to be published by Tor July 14th, 2020. Thank you for speaking with me.
Thanks so much for having me.
So this is the third book in the series, and I have to apologize. I haven't read either of the previous two books, but the series in general, how did, consider, writers always have a lot of ideas bubbling around. What made this particular series rise up above the rest and get written?
That's a good question. It is too many books, not enough time, both with reading and writing. Mm-hmm. I'll be honest, that I had turned in a bunch of different pitches to my editor. This was one of them. There were other things like, a 1920s Depression era werewolf novel and all sorts of other things. And I believe, if I am not mistaken, that probably the thing that made this rise to the top is the pure crass commercialism reason that the novelette in this universe, The Lady Astronaut of Mars, won a Hugo Award.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So that is not the lovely artistic answer you were probably looking for, but I feel like it's important to be realistic.
I mean, it's still a work of art, regardless of why that one, this one was written. But okay, so it sounds like you do fantasy and science fiction, and
that's correct. I write kind of all over the map, fantasy and science fiction. In the novels, they've all tended to be historical in some way. Mm-hmm. So, this one is set in 1950. Actually, this one is 1963. The first book in the series is 1952. Mm-hmm. So I like playing around with that kind of thing.
And it's an alternate history kind of series. Right.
So it begins, as I mentioned, in 1952 when I slam an asteroid into Washington, D.C., which was not wish fulfillment when I wrote it. And that kicks off the space program fast and early and with an international effort at a time when computers are still predominantly women. Mm-hmm. So if you want to send a computer into space, you have to send a woman. I often describe this as Apollo-era science fiction that's women-centered, or like punch card punk.
Punch card punk?
Yeah.
I'm not...
Like steampunk, but... it's a term I made up. So steampunk people know about, but punch card, with steampunk, the power that is driving things is steam. And with this, the power that's driving things is that we are in the punch card era of computing that's just on the cusp of that.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Right. It was that's the idea I had, but it's very interesting. I hadn't heard it before, but that's pretty cool.
Cool.
So tell us about this third book. I guess you can touch on what the first two were about without revealing anything, and then where does this third one take place?
Sure. So the first two follow Elma York, who is a computer, so she's a math whiz. She's also a pilot. And it's really, the first book is about the push to get off of the Earth, and then the second book is about the mission to Mars. So book 3 is a parallel novel. The Relentless Moon is a parallel novel to the second book. Mm-hmm. They take place simultaneously, but it's what's happening on Earth and the Moon while the first Mars expedition is going on. You can actually read it as a standalone. I work very hard to make sure that you can step into my series all of my series at any point. Mm-hmm. Ideally, from my point of view, you would probably read Calculating Stars first, but then I think it's up to you if you want to read Relentless Moon or The Faded Sky next. Calculating Stars and Faded Sky, which are book 1 and 2, are designed as a duology. They're meant to be read together, but you can actually just hop straight to the third.
So I see in the blurb, and again, we don't want to reveal any spoilers, but it talks about an overheated political situation, riots, and sabotage plague the space program.
Yeah.
Is the country falling apart in this third one, or?
So what's interesting about the way we react to a crisis is that there's some fairly fairly consistent patterns. We're seeing them right now. It's an interesting time for this book to come out. The country is split on the way to handle the problem of the planet overheating. One of the things that will happen with a meteorite strike is we are very familiar with what happens when you've got a land-based strike. But if you have a water strike, or specifically a shallow water strike, which is what actually happens in these books, you eject a ton of water into the upper atmosphere, and it doesn't precipitate out at the same rates that it does when it's in the lower atmosphere, where we see most of our clouds. So it acts as a greenhouse gas, and that can cause a runaway greenhouse effect, which is what's happening to the planet. So all of that means that what's happening is that people are realizing that the space program cannot be the only solution. There will be people who inevitably cannot get off the planet, either because they aren't from the right socioeconomic background to qualify for astronaut training, or because they have medical issues that would kill them on launch. So there's a lot of unrest around that. And what we see, based on, historically, is that there are kind of two ways that people will react to a crisis. Or I should say two ends of a spectrum. One, and the first immediate response that people have, is that they want to help. And then the other one is that they will become fearful and want to protect themselves and what they see as theirs. And sort of which direction society goes in those two areas depends on who is setting the tone. So in the first book, we have a president he's a Quaker. He was Secretary of Agriculture and happened to be out of the Capitol when the meteorite hit. And so he is very, this is a problem, and let's solve this problem. And he's very, let's everybody pull together. In these books, in the Relentless Moon, it's 11 years later, so we have a different president now. He's much more of a hawk. He's much more of a let's solve this via military, let's protect, it's very much an America First kind of situation. And that is feeding on the fears that people have and causing some of that unrest and rioting. I think anytime you've got fear or anger, you will channel it. Uncertainty as well. All of those are a form of energy. And so you'll channel it, and you will channel it into whatever kind of model you have been presented as. This is the appropriate way to do it. And when it's an unprecedented situation, you're much more likely to look for guidance from someone at the top.
Mm-hmm. Would you call this a hard science fiction novel or series?
Yes. Yes. Yes, very much so. I worked with astronauts, folks from NASA, rocket scientists from other areas, doctors, geologists. Like, basically, if there is a piece of science in there that I mention and it affects, especially if it affects the plot, but if I talk about it, it is as accurate as I can make it. Mm-hmm. If it is inaccurate, then I make sure that it is, or I'm uncertain, then I make sure it never goes anywhere near the plot, or it's not a plot point. For instance, the journey to Mars, you have to solve the radiation shielding. Like, that's a must. I have no idea how they do that. So the radiation shielding will never fail in these books. I just proceed as if they have solved it, and then we don't talk about what that solve is. Okay. So what percentage, for the series in general, and also this third book, how much takes place on Earth versus out in space? So the first book is mostly Earth-based. The Faded Sky is pretty much all space all the time. And Relentless Moon is likewise. We leave the planet, I think, chapter 16 out of 40-some chapter. I can't remember how many. Look, I've got a copy of the book sitting next to me, which No, it's 53 chapters. So we get into space real fast, proportionally speaking.
Okay. I'm speaking with Mary-Robinette Kowal, author of The Relentless Moon. You can find more information on her work at maryrobinettekowal.com or ladyastronautclub.com. If you like this podcast so far, please subscribe to it and rate it if you can. Please go to my website, chrisalvarez.com or fullcontactnerd.com for links to news, videos, new books, and my social media links. You can find the links to my other podcasts and associated book lists at historyrabbithole.com. That's rabbit as in the animal. historyrabbithole.com. And now back to the podcast. How did you deal with, gender inequality in the workplace and in general in this book? Is it how it was in the 50s or is it different?
It's a little different. That's one of the reasons that I set it in the 50s, because of the fact that we hadn't replaced computers with mechanical things. So they were still women. So they were very heavily involved in the space industry. The way it works is that they are more advanced along their timeline than we are, but they're also beginning to get into the pushback, which is one of the things that happens anytime you have a progressive move. You'll get a pushback. So they're just in the beginning of the pushback where they're trying to put people back into the boxes that they were in. The biggest thing that I do is I just don't ignore the gender issues. It's lovely to think that it's a product of the 1950s, but a lot of the sexist things that my characters encounter are things that astronauts face today, or that people in other, not even just in STEM, but in other fields face. The antagonist is based on someone I used to work with. The antagonist for the first two books. So several of the things are, just there, but when they were first contemplating women in the program in the real world, two of the things that they were called in actual newspapers, in official publications on multiple occasions, are astronaut and glamournaut.
Astronaut?
Yeah.
Oh, I
astronaut.
see. I see. Yeah.
Astronauts and astronauts.
Yeah. Having to I understand the problem with differentiating and trying to suggest something with that.
Yeah.
So, did you mention all the research you've done for the book, or was there other stuff you had to research that we haven't touched on yet?
Well, let's see. I can talk about my research for literally days. I went to the neutral buoyancy lab. I've gotten to try on spacesuits, or parts of spacesuits, I should say. And Adam Savage let me try on his replica Apollo spacesuit, which was amazing. It's a really cool thing. And then just a ton of reading. Basically, anytime there's an opportunity to go someplace and talk about space, I will. And also seeing launches. One of the things that's killing me right now is that and it's I say that and acknowledge that it is not literally killing me. It's just merely disappointing. But the Perseverance rover is launching during my book tour, and my publisher had arranged for me originally to go to Florida to watch the launch. It's going to Mars. And that is, it's still going to Mars. I am clearly not going to Florida right now.
Yeah, that is a shame. That's
yeah.
Do you have, so this access you have to these resources, is it because of your writing, or is there some other way that you're able to access?
It's much easier when you have to get some of the access. But honestly, it's mostly just writing and asking. NASA is very open and really wants people to have good science literacy. So a lot of the stuff is just me emailing someone and saying, hey, is there someone I can talk to? Like I've been corresponding with Bill Berry, who's NASA's chief historian. And I just wrote to someone at the science department and was like, is there anyone there who can talk to me? And they hooked me up with Gray Hatloma, who's in communications, and he connected me to Bill Berry, and then connected me to a bunch of other people at NASA who are like, yeah, I'll totally talk to you about being a geologist who specializes in Mars. Yeah, it's been really lovely how open people are about sharing their knowledge.
Yeah. So writing a book is really an excuse to just get into these places and talk to people.
Accurate statement. Full on accurate.
So what are some of the what are some of the things that just inspire you as a writer? You know, books, music, shows, whatever.
So a lot of it is shows, nonfiction. Particularly in the areas that I tend to write, will often spark a lot of story ideas. Oddly, one of the things that will sometimes really spark a story idea is watching a show that is badly done, because I get so annoyed with, like, but they should have done, and they should have done that, and they should have done this, and they should have, and I'm like, well, you know what? Instead of complaining about it, I could just do those things.
Yeah. So you don't want to mention some of these shows that bother you? No, you don't have to.
Okay, no, I will give one example because I know it will be taken in good humor. Andy Weir, who's lovely, and his book Artemis, which is like he does the work, but there are also places where I'm like, oh, Andy, and one of them is he had this thing about how on the moon, you never got hot coffee because water boiled before reaching, because the pressure is so low that water boils before it gets hot. And I'm like, okay, so great. That's really cool. And that is actually the way water would boil in this low pressure. However, there's a thing called a pressure kettle. And you can, like people who live in high altitudes run into this problem. There are ways, pressure cookers. This is a known technology that has been around for really long time. They would just have pressure kettles and pressure cookers on the moon in order to solve that. So I 100% put a pressure kettle into my novel specifically because I was annoyed by that when I read it in Artemis.
That's funny. But yes, I know it's everyone's trying to teach. Everyone's trying to do their best, I think.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. And it's a different experience. Like I know that what a pressure cooker is because my grandmother and my mom use them all the time. So if you're not around them, sure. Yeah. Why would you know that thing existed? But
yeah.
I'm like, hello, I have a way to solve that.
Yeah. I mean, that's the scariest.
My characters get hot coffee.
They have. Yeah. I guess that's the scariest thing. Like not even knowing that there's the question that you need to ask, or
yeah,
you know what I'm saying? Like you say, you have the experience of it, so you think of it.
Yeah, that's one of the things that I try to do is I try to make sure that I have a very wide range of people who are beta reading for me. So that's been like they've saved me on so many things that I thought, I've thought this through, and then I'm like, nope. You have not thought that through. Or the thing that I love even more is, you missed an opportunity here. And those are the things that get really exciting. Like there's go on.
I was going to ask if there was any scientific principle that you weren't aware of that when you did become aware of had forced you to change something important in the book, or?
A little bit. One of it's something that I was aware of. I just didn't think about how it would play out. In the novel, I do not think that it is a spoiler to say about a book that takes place in space that there's a problem with a rocket. And And in the scene as I originally wrote it, the rocket received a lateral impact. So an impact coming in from the side. And the astronaut who was proofing it for me is like, yeah, the rocket wouldn't actually survive that because it's not designed to take lateral stress. It's designed for vertical stress because it's all about pushing it off the ground. And so all of the tension and stuff on it, everything that it's designed to resist is the force of gravity going through the column of the rocket. Anything that's coming in on the side, the walls of a rocket are incredibly thin. So it would just, it would rupture, and then because it's still loaded with fuel, you would get an explosion from that. I'm like, well, what if I vent? And he's like, yeah, but you've still got atmosphere in it. So that sudden pressure, you would still, like any of these scenarios, you're going to get an explosive event. And all of that stuff was stuff that when he said it, I'm like, oh yeah, no, totally. Yep. See that. But just had not thought about it in quite that context. Because you see ships getting hit from the side so often in media that I just assumed, and I know better than this, but I just internalized that was a thing you could do to a ship.
But there's so many factors involved that, like you say, everyone seems to do it. And then, it's amazing how many different principles that there are out there that people just don't realize. Yeah, that's pretty cool. Does the book have any sort of soundtrack or aesthetic that you would apply to it?
It is very much a spy thriller. So, honestly though, the soundtrack that I was, had running, while I was writing it was, I had just seen Captain Marvel, and, the soundtrack was completely stuck in my head, but also, like, that was the kind of energy and, sort of active woman protagonist that I wanted. But I also cannot write when there are words in music. So I have a all instrumental, recreated the Captain Marvel soundtrack with just instrumental tracks, which is what I was writing to.
Oh, wow.
It's really high energy intensive, but it's all like strings.
Okay.
The feel of the thing is much more like a 1950s detective novel, thriller thing. It's more of a Hitchcock suspense kind of thing.
Okay. Does this novel wrap up the series, or are you planning to write more on this?
This is a trick question. This novel works as a standalone. You can read this novel and nothing else. It has a satisfying ending to this novel. But there is a fourth book called The Martian Contingency, which is all Mars all the time, and takes place after both this and The Fated Sky.
Okay. As far as how you do your writing, is there anything out of the ordinary you do to prepare drafts or outlines or your final?
I think the thing that I do that I don't see a lot of other authors doing is that I like a lot of people reading along with me as I'm going. I come out of live theater, and so I'm used to having an audience to around so that I can gauge how things are working, whether or not they are. And so it's very useful for me to have a lot of people reading along as I go. So my process is that I'll write a chapter, and then I have my ideal reader who gets it immediately. That's Alessandra Meekum, who's also my assistant. And everybody else is about 2 chapters behind. So that means that when I write chapter 3, I give them chapter 1. And what I've found is that for my own brain and process, that works really well to allow me to be far enough ahead that if they, that I can if I've discovered something in writing chapter 3, that I can go ahead and put it into chapter 1 before they read it, so that it's far enough ahead that I can, kind of fold in revisions, but not so far ahead that if they have an unexpected reaction to chapter 1, that I'm like deeply committed to wherever it is that I am in the novel. So it helps me keep from going down a wrong path, and allows me to have much more of a give and take and get a sense of how the pacing is playing. I don't want any feedback on like language, but for the how this story is playing, it's very helpful for me.
How has your approach to writing changed over time?
When I started, coming out of theater, I had a very solid grasp on character, and it was almost all internalized stuff because I'd been doing it for so long. Plot was harder for me because everything that I'd been doing, although I was familiar with the audience and how they responded, I was always working with someone else's framework, someone else's script. So the thing that I have worked on hardest has been plot. And until recently, all of my books had to be rigorously plotted before I started. The thing that I've been looking for is, with all of the kind of skills that I've acquired, is trying to get to a point where it's internalized so that I'm not thinking about it. The example that I use sometimes is when I was learning to do puppets, you have to learn to make the puppet walk. And so my mentor had me just walk the puppet around a table for like 45 minutes while we chatted. And he was looking for the point when I no longer had to watch the puppet and could carry on a conversation. It still continued to walk smoothly. And then he had me do the same thing, going the other direction to teach my other hand. But the point was that he wanted me to have walking be so natural that I didn't have to think about it, in the same way that I don't have to think to walk with my own body, so that when I was on stage, I could just think about the art and not think about the technique. And that's what I'm trying to do with my writing, is internalize a lot of these processes and tools, so that I'm not thinking about them. So I'm trying now to write more intuitively, and to not plot as much out. It slows me down a lot, but what I was worried that I was in danger of having novels that were formulaic. I don't think there's anything wrong with a formula, but I do think that one of the things that is exciting about any particular artist or work of art in any medium are the unique connections that happen in their own brain. And so I wanted to, I wanted my plots to be less technique driven and more kind of art feeling driven. So I'm that's a thing that I'm in process with now. And it's a little scary still.
No, I understand. So I was curious. So you mentioned your puppeteering work. I've actually interviewed a couple puppeteers in the past. Hugh Speight and Jim Martin. If you know Gary Gnu and Hugh Speight did. What's that?
I said, "Oh, lovely." Yeah.
So it's really fascinating, the passion they bring to their work, and also dissuading people of the idea that it's just moving these little puppets around, that you really you're really in the role.
Yeah, it is absolutely acting. It's just that you're acting with an inanimate object rather than your own body. But other than that, it's still, how do I move in order to convey this to something, to an audience? What is my motivation? We have some additional tools that a meat actor does not have, but it's still just acting.
When you were young, were you creating like worlds for puppets and playing that out?
Puppets didn't come into my life until high school. I was one of those kids who wanted to do everything. So I did theater, I did art, I was music, I wrote, I wanted to be a veterinarian. Really, I wanted to do all of the things. I was lucky that my mom didn't force me to pick something. And then discovered puppetry, and it was the closest I had found to anything that combined all of the things that I like to do. So I did that for about 25 years-ish.
I'm speaking with Mary-Robinette Kowal, author of The Relentless Moon. You can find more information on her work at maryrobinettekowal.com or ladyastronautclub.com. If you like this podcast so far, please subscribe to it and rate it if you can. Please go to my website, crisalvarez.com or fullcontactnerd.com for links to news, videos, new books, and my social media links. You can find the links to my other podcasts and associated book lists at historyrabbithole.com. That's rabbit as in the animal. historyrabbithole.com. And now back to the podcast. So I was going to ask if there's other work apart from that non-writing work that may have influenced how and what you write.
I was an art major in college, actually, which taught the same thing about separating techniques and internalizing one technique at a time, which has been really useful for me. And what I often find is that some of the things that I learned in art school not just help me as a philosophy, but that frequently I can give someone the same thought processes that I went through in art school to, say, an engineer. And that that process of creating and problem solving is very much the same from, skill to skill. It's the skills are different. Mm-hmm. But the way people engage with them, the ways that you have to break it down, the ways you think sometimes critically and very word oriented, where you step through the process and it's really this rigid, narrowly focused process where it's like, well, I'll do this and I'll do that and then I'll do that. I'll do my underdrawing and then I'll do my thumbnail sketch and then my large sketch and then my underdrawing and then I'm going to paint. Mm-hmm. And that in all of these things that there's that, and then there's this other thing that happens on a totally nonverbal level where you cannot, if someone asks you, how did you come up with that? You're like, I don't know. My brain just presented it to me. Mm-hmm. And here it is. And I love it too, but I also don't know that I should really be taking credit for it. And that happens to engineers. It happens to mathematicians. It happens to kind of everybody. This moment of the back part of my brain just put things together. I don't have any words to explain how that process happened.
So your first novel was it just one among, was writing at that point in time, was writing just one of the many things you were pursuing, or did you focus on, what I'm going to do? I'm going to be a writer now.
So my first novel, which no one will ever read, was one of many things that I was focused on or interested in. It took me about 10 years to write. Then the second novel was because my brother had moved to China. He was with the State Department with his kids. And it was before you could do video calls with any kind of reliability. And I was also not performing because I'd had a severe puppet injury. So I was out for about 2 years and rediscovered how much I enjoyed writing. And that one was very much what's going to happen here? Oh, hey, I forgot that I like this thing. Mm-hmm. After that, it started to become much more deliberate, where I was trying to figure out, how do you do this thing? The advantage, I guess, that I had coming into writing from a lifetime spent doing freelancing and working in the arts was that I assume that if it's an art, there's a way to get paid for it. So I immediately started looking into classes and lessons and things about, what is the publication process like? How does one monetize what one writes? Mm-hmm.
So, being a puppeteer is a much more physical occupation, and writing
Yes.
is sedentary.
Yes.
Is that, had an
problem?
effect on you, or,
Yeah. Weirdly, in some ways, I feel like writing is much harder on my body than puppetry was. I mean, puppetry was exhausting, but I was in really good physical shape.
Mm-hmm.
I used to be able to hold the speakers that we took into the schools were 50 pounds each, and I carry one in each hand and could hold it out with a straight arm, not a 90-degree angle from my shoulder, but still, hold it pretty far out with a straight arm, not even think about it really. I worked a puppet that weighed 125 pounds and walked with it. So and I had injuries, but like in the way an athlete has an injury, that there's, something went wrong, and an accident happened. With writing, I have to think about my posture all the time. I have to make sure that I build exercise into my day. I hate exercising so much. Don't like it.
Yeah.
And, but I have to, because otherwise it is just me in a chair. And that's like, I've had more lower back problems since going to writing full time than I ever had as a puppeteer.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I can see that. So just back to the writing of this book, were there any parts you had to take out, because of, the editor's comments, or again, the science thing, or anything like that?
I finished this novel, and it was 180,000 words long.
Oh.
It's real long, real long. The previous book in this series was 99,000 words, so I had doubled the length of it, which was a little surprising to everyone involved, especially me. It's the longest thing I've ever. So I cut the heck out of it to get it down to a reasonable length. So I rolled characters together. There's subplots that I cut. There's a ton of stuff. I did not fight my editor on anything. I was just like, please find things that we can cut. This book is too long.
So I was going to ask if there was anything that pained you to remove, but it sounds like you were more than happy to slash and burn the thing down.
Yeah, I really was. I mean, there's stuff that I'm like, oh, that was a really good scene, but I do not regret its absence.
Mm-hmm. So do you feel, it seems like, once every time you impose limitations to a creative endeavor, as painful as it seems at the start, at the end, you have something even more interesting than you imagined.
Yeah.
So, did you find that here? Doing
Absolutely. That? Yeah. No, it's working within parameters. I think it forces a different kind of creativity, but yeah, any time that I've been forced to with something like this, it's like, this is always better. Like when I was in theater and a director would tell me to do something I did not want to do, I would try to find a way to make it feel true to the character and make it something that I did want to do. Mm-hmm. And it was always better. Every now and then, there's a thing where you're like, we gave it a try. Mm-hmm. But for the most part, it's better. The, that thing that I talked about with the lateral impact, on the spaceship, the scene is so much better because I was unwilling to live with, you can probably get away with it because it shows up in media so much. I'm like, no, let's, if we're going to do this, let's do it right. And the scene is so much better. It's so much more tense.
Mm-hmm. Cool.
And interesting.
Yeah. So a bit of a whimsical question here. When you were young, was there any power, technology, or fictional setting that you wanted or yearned for?
I was a huge Battlestar Galactica fan. I really wanted a Viper a lot, so much. It was that, and the Deryni books, Deryni, were just the different kinds of magic and the way magic worked was so cool. And I did not realize how much of an influence it had on me until after I wrote the first novels that I had published, and then happened to be doing a partial reread and realized that I had internalized aspects of that magic system and hadn't even just like, yeah, but those two things are like, yeah. And still I would like, if someone said, "Hey, Mary-Robinette, would you like a Viper now?" And I'm like, yes, yes, I would. In fact, I would. Yes. Thank you.
So you don't have to go into detail, but did you enjoy the remake or? Yeah,
I did.
Okay.
I thought they did great work on that. I was really resistant when I found out that they were making Starbuck a woman, and then completely fell in love with the character in very different ways than I was with the completely in love with the original Starbuck, because I was a teenage girl, and you know.
The hair, right? They had
the hair, yeah, the hair, yeah.
So much hair.
I did actually join the Dirk Benedict fan club when I was a kid because of that. Which is, I think, the only fan club I joined.
Huh, that's funny. So you have talked a little bit about you've talked quite a bit about writing the book. Were there any other difficulties in finishing it or getting it published?
Well, no difficulties getting it published because it was already sold. Getting it finished was challenging. There were a number of things that happened in my personal life, that slowed me down in ways that were difficult. I had a family member who had a health thing that had them in and out of the hospital for about 3 months, and I was one of the primary caregivers during that time. And it was right when I was supposed to be finishing the book. And it was less about not having the time to write and more about just like, I did not have the focus to be able to write. I have depression, which I'm pretty open about, but it's, there are times when you're like, okay, you get to pick, one of 3 ways that you want me to be functional. Or I guess you get to pick, you get to pick two or 3 ways that you want me to be functional, and the third just has to go. And it was pretty much writing.
So when you came back to writing, did it take effort?
It felt like going back to the gym for the first time. You do build up stamina for this. And there are things that that come more easily the more you do them. It's like, if you think about for those of us who do not do math on a daily basis as part of our lives, but if you think about the math that you had to do in high school, and there was a lot of it that you didn't have to, grab your phone and Google, wait, how do I come up with, you had learned it and you could just do it. Even arithmetic to a certain degree. So we don't have to do that very often in our heads. But there are other things along those lines that if you drill it comes very easily. And the same is true with writing. It's like, wait, how do I do description again? Oh, right. I want to make sure that not all of my sentences start with the same noun verb pattern. Okay, right. And so it's that kind of thing. Some of it is silly, stupid, technical stuff, and some of it is just being able to hold a story in your head.
So how long do you think it took you to get back in the groove time-wise?
That's tricky, because that was there were a lot of things that were going on that year.
Okay.
So it was, I would say, on and off. I probably a couple of months to get back in, I would guess. There was a certain amount of within the first 2 weeks, when I really started focusing on it, I'm like, oh, okay, right. I remember. Okay, this is this thing. It was probably a couple of months before before I was writing at pace again. Just to give you an example, maybe a better metric for people who aren't familiar with how this works. When I am in good form and, like not having a bad brain day, not having other things going on, I write around 1,500 words in an hour, roughly. So, sitting down for a 2-hour session means that I'll get about 2,000 words, somewhere in that range. And that's easy and that's very sustainable. I was really happy when I was doing 3 sentences a day.
I see. Okay. Yeah. I don't want to press you on that. I was just interested in sort of the basics of that situation. Yeah.
I don't mind talking about the way my brain works. I'm just trying to talk around the things that were going on with family members, because those are not my stories to tell.
Right. Okay. What's your current writing project?
My current writing project is something called The Spare Man, which is a standalone science fiction novel that is on an interplanetary cruise ship, and it's a locked-room murder mystery with a happily married couple and their small dog. And if anyone is a fan of the Thin Man movies with Nick and Nora Charles and their little dog Asta, and you're thinking that this sounds a lot like The Thin Man in Space, you would not be incorrect. And that I am heavily influenced by loving those films.
Is that hard science fiction, or is that more space fantasy?
That is space opera. Like, I mean, I am, like, I sat down with a rocket scientist and like a little, actually, excuse me, not a rocket scientist, a rocket engineer. There's a difference, and designed the spaceship. So, and it works. It's like, it's got artificial gravity, but it's artificial gravity that's being, it's using centrifugal force, for the artificial gravity. When you go up a level, it gets lighter, and the angles of the floors have to tilt in order to give the appropriate amount of force. So, like, we thought this sucker through. But what is that thing being propelled by? I have no idea. No idea at all. Like, if the science is a plot point, absolutely. Totally, definitely, I've at least put some thought into it. How the subdermal cameras work, I know that's a problem we're going to solve. They don't have to fix a subdermal camera, so I just let them have it.
Yeah. Cool. Where can people find you online? Social media, webpage?
Yeah, the easiest thing is actually to go to my webpage, Mary-Robinette Kowal.com, which is very long. If you don't want to learn how to spell that, you can also go to ladyastronautclub.com, which takes you to my website, but just a slightly different area of it. But once you're on the main page of the site, you can sign up for my newsletter. You can see all of the different social things that I'm on. If you follow me on Twitter, I will talk about peeing in space. I tend to live tweet spacewalks. I will also sometimes talk about puppets, but with absolutely no context.
I'll just spell Mary-Robinette Kowal quickly for listeners. MaryRobinetteKowal.com. Do you have any, well, that's all the questions I have. Do you have any final thoughts or words?
Be safe, wear your mask.
Yeah, I agree.
That's about it.
Yeah, cool. Well, I appreciate you talking with me.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for taking time to talk with me, too.
Thank you for listening. If you like this podcast, Full Contact Nerd, please subscribe to it and rate it and review it if possible. I have many other options to geek out on sci-fi, fantasy, and horror. whether you prefer books, movies, TV, video games, anime, or whatever you choose. You can find links to interesting videos on my Facebook page, Full Contact Nerd. You can find links to interesting news articles and academic studies on my Twitter page, Full Contact Nerd. You can find cosplay model and convention photos on my Instagram page, Cris Alvarez Sci-Fi. You can find my interview videos on my YouTube page, Full Contact Nerd. You can also sign up for my newsletter at chrisalvarez.com or fullcontactnerd.com. In the newsletter, I post additional video and news links, as well as regular updates on new, nerd-friendly fiction and nonfiction books being published. Please remember, my name Cris does not have an H. C-R-I-S. Thank you for listening, and keep imagining the past, the present, and the future.